3 reasons why you're still depressed after therapy. So listen, guys, I know we all talk about going to therapy and how it's something that's going to help change your life, and it will. But here's the thing. There's a good chance you're still going to therapy and you're still feeling depressed, and you're probably asking yourself like, hey, what's going on? And that's something that's actually very common. Believe it or not, therapy is a place where you start to help you to overcome that depression. But there's a way that you need to go about it to help ensure that you overcome your depression so that you're able to move forward with your life. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this podcast. Because here's the thing, guys. There's certain feelings that we will feel, and they will come and they will go. And this is going to kind of get into one of those first points, but I want to make sure I touch on this like even more. Feelings are kind of like the weather, right? There's nothing that I can do to make the sun stay out forever. And I can make the argument that if the sun always stayed out and it never rained, it'll be catastrophic to the world. Therefore, there needs to be periods where there's rain, periods where there's snow. And believe it or not, this keeps the whole world moving, keeps the whole world operating. And maybe thinking, well, shouldn't I be happy all the time? And I'll say this, if you're happy all the time, you wouldn't know what sadness feels like. And sadness is actually a thing that reminds you of why happiness is such a good thing to have. It's kind of like keeping your taste buds fresh. When you go to a wine tasting event, typically they give you cheese and crackers to make sure that you wipe away the wine from the previous drink so that when you taste a new one, you're able to taste it and really enjoy it. And what sadness does is that it, one, shows you that there's something that you cared about, which is why you're sad. But two, it helps you show the value of happiness so that the next time you feel happy, you don't just brush it aside and think that it's normal. You actually appreciate it. You enjoy it. You savor it like a kid would savor an ice cream on a hot summer day. Like, that's what sadness does. So in this podcast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and talk about the ways that you're staying depressed, even though you've gone to therapy, but also I'm going to give you ways to help you to truly overcome that depression. So before we get into that, make sure you hit the subscribe button, because by subscribing, you join a community of entrepreneurs and professionals that are working to create a mindset that help them to change the world. So I want you to be able to join that community and get more podcast tips just like this. So before I get into point number 1, there's a great topic that I need to talk about, and it's called the reality gap. So what is the reality gap? Well, this is something coined by Russ Harris, who's a therapist himself, and what he talks about is that there's a place between where we are and where we want to be, and that distance is called the reality gap, and we all have it. The people with the bigger reality gaps are the people that are far away from the life that they imagine, and when you're really far from the life that you imagine, guess what that creates? That creates depression. What you want to do as a professional, as an entrepreneur, as a person listening to this podcast, is that you want to slowly over the course of time close that gap. Because when you close it, you start to have that happiness, because the thoughts that you have, the vision that you have of how you want your life to look like, is literally in front of you. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to create. But again, what stops that is the reality gap, okay? So I want to make sure I go over that piece. Now, to get into the first point, this is the first reason why you're still depressed, even after you've gone to therapy, because you're a perfectionist. But more specifically, you're a perfectionist internally. So we all know what a perfectionist is externally, right? Everything has to be perfect. Every nook and cranny has to be perfect so that there's no chance of failure, right? And what this is an anxiety response. One would also say that it's a trauma response as well, because people that are perfectionists believe that they're not good enough unless things are perfect. And the biggest fear they have is by being judged, right? If they see themselves as being judged, if they see themselves as failing, it was totally just wrecked their world. And that's something that they can't have. So as a result, every little thing has to be perfect. And that's where their anxiety comes from. But here's the thing. Right now, what you're doing is you're applying that perfectionist internally. And what this looks like is when sadness comes up, we feel as though we haven't made progress. The biggest thing that I can tell you in this podcast is that there's a difference between sadness and depression. Sadness is something that we feel when, let's say, someone misses a date, right? Let's say we schedule a date. Someone flakes on us, whether it's intentional or not intentional, right? Like that's disheartening, right? That's disappointing. Sadness will come. Another thing that may cause sadness is when it rains. Let's say you have a party set up and then the party's outside. Yeah, that's going to kind of mess up your flow a little bit, right? And I'll even say this, when you fail at something, right? It can be failing at a sales call, presentation, whatever the case may be. Yeah, there's going to be some sadness. But depression is something that lasts over the course of 2 weeks and even longer. It's also accompanied by low mood, lack of energy. The same things that used to bring you happiness and joy no longer can do that. But also you're even thinking about self-harm, or let's say you're not eating, or maybe you're eating too much, and as a result, your weight fluctuates. These are the things that characterize depression, not necessarily sadness. But what's happening is that you're experiencing sadness, which is normal, and you're thinking that this is your depression, but it really is not. There's nothing that a therapist can do. There's nothing that even I can do to make sadness completely go away forever. If someone ever makes that claim, you need to tell them that they're lying and you need to get your money back. But someone that you want to believe is someone that's going to tell you that sadness is okay. And that's what I'm telling you. Everyone that experiences sadness will live to fight another day. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. But because right now you believe that everything has to be perfect internally, you're confusing the sadness with depression. Therefore, you're believing that you're depressed. And the worst thing about believing that you're depressed is you're going to start doing depressing things. So you're going to start curling up in your bed. You're going to start thinking about taking your own life. You're going to start thinking about quitting and giving up and not going outside and just staying inside and being a shell of yourself, right? Like, you're going to do all these things because you're believing that this emotion that you're feeling is depression, when really it's not. All right, point number 2, and I have to say you may want to cover your ears because I'm going to hurt some feelings with this one. But point number 2 of why you're still depressed, even though you've gone to therapy, is that you're not fully committed to the process. I hate to say it, but I myself have had clients who weren't committed to the process. And I've literally had to stop sessions and ask them, hey, what's going on? You signed up for these sessions. You've logged on to these sessions, but also you paid for these sessions and you're still not taking action. What's up? Because you're wasting your time and also you're wasting my time. So let's talk about it. And believe it or not, that is a part of the therapy process. There's people that believe that they need to do something, but they're not ready to take the change. They think that showing up to therapy is everything and they don't need to do anything after that. But therapy is just 1 hour a week, right? And for some people, it's 1 hour every 2 weeks or 1 hour every month. That 1 hour is not enough to compensate for everything that's happening outside of that therapy session. But what I need you to do is take what you've learned in a therapy session and apply it outside consistently. When you do that, you have a surefire way of overcoming your depression because you have an evidence-based plan. Everything that I give on my podcast, so literally this podcast you're listening to, and everything I give in my therapy sessions are evidence-based, meaning that people have taken time out of their day to study these techniques, write studies about them, come back to me and say, hey, these things work, so do them. And that's what you're getting. So what I'm saying is you can have 100% confidence that these techniques that I'm giving you, that your therapist is giving you as well, they work. But if you're not working, guess what? They're not going to work. So being fully committed to the process, if you want to know what this looks like, because this is what I tell my clients, being fully committed is you showing up on time, is you showing up consistently. And during the sessions, you're engaged. Therapy is not all the therapists doing the talking. It's a team sport, right? Like, you have to participate in your own rescue. And that's a quote that I got from one of my good friends. Like, you have to be a participant in this process. But even outside of the process, you got to do the work. You know, I got to admit, you know, I go through my own coaching sessions and I have a dietitian that I see. And what I do is I actually do my homework, take a picture of it, and then I send it to them before our next session even starts. That's how committed you got to be. Don't wait for the session to come up and then say, hey, I forgot, or I didn't do it, or whatever the case may be, because that's not showing that you're committed. You know, I even have some clients who come and they say, hey, they just didn't do it. And what I have to do is stop. And for 5 minutes, we have to do the work because the work is undeniable. You have to do it. And if that means we got to take 5 minutes out of the session and do it, so be it. But you have to be committed to this process. So point number 2 of why you're still depressed is because you're not committed. Step number 3, the final step, the final thing that's keeping you depressed, even though you've gone to therapy, is that you lack gratitude. And this lack of gratitude is increasing your reality gap. So what am I talking about here? Well, when you don't have gratitude, you fail to realize the life that you actually have in front of you. So you may be thinking that you're on the 1 yard line, right? So let's talk football. So let's say you imagine yourself being on the 1 yard line, meaning you have 99 yards to go. But in reality, you're actually already on the 99 yard line and you just got 1 yard to go. But because you don't believe that, because you're so caught up in social media and comparing yourself to other people, you believe that you're so far off that you're not even close. And when you believe that you're not close, you're not going to take any actions because this thing that you're struggling with seems like it's Mount Everest, when really it's just a hop and a skip and you're there. Gratitude, guys. Gratitude is the thing that gets rid of the desires and the comparisons, which are the demons that keeps us feeling depressed. When you have all these desires, when you're lusting after things that you don't have, it creates this distance between who you are and where you want to be. And what you want to do is you want to remove that stuff. It's almost like addition by subtraction. What you want to do is you want to remove that stuff out of your heart and then start adding things that you find to be valuable. The things that you find valuable, believe it or not, are things that are free. They're things that you can access at this moment. And if you don't believe me, I'll say this. If you're someone that's telling yourself, hey, I really want a big house, and when I have a big house, I'll then feel happy. I'll ask you, what would you do if you had a big house? Well, you probably say, well, I'll decorate it. I'll invite friends over, right? I'll watch a movie, play in the yard, or whatever the case may be. And here's the thing, all those things you can do at this moment. That's the thing between goals or even materialistic things and values. Goals are things that sometimes it can take years, even decades for you to accomplish. But values are things that are right there in front of you. You can access them at any time. And when you do that and you practice gratitude about those things, you will feel very, very rich. You know, I'll give you this quote too. One of my clients, they said in a session, they said, you're so poor that all you have is money. You know, that was a great quote that they said, and it hit me, and it hit a lot of my clients because I shared it with them as well. But think about that, right? You're so poor that all you have is money. For a lot of people, they're very poor. Their bank accounts will probably surprise you. Being poor is not a materialistic thing, monetary thing. Being poor is a spiritual thing. It's a characteristic thing as well. These things that you're looking for, you have them in front of you. By practicing gratitude, you'll realize it and see that you're not that far off from the life that you want. So to summarize these 3 main tips that are keeping you depressed, first one that I said is that you're a perfectionist internally. A lot of people, they know perfectionist as an outside thing, an external thing, but a lot of people, they're practicing perfectionism internally as well. And that's where I said there's a difference between being sad and being depressed. The second point that I made is that you're not fully committed to the process. Guys, the 1 hour that you spend in therapy is not enough to compensate for years, decades of, let's say, trauma, let's say going through really, really bad things, like whatever it is, right? And even some of the stuff that you're going through now, 1 hour a week is not enough to overcome those things. You're going to need to take that hour and you're going to need to practice the things that were taught over the course of that week. And then the last thing is your lack of gratitude is increasing your reality gap. And again, your reality gap is the distance between where you are and where you want to be. Bigger the gap, the more depressed you are. And what you want to do over the course of time is just slowly close that gap. The smaller the gap, the more happy and fulfilled you are because you have everything you need. And there's a good chance you have those things right now, but you're just not practicing gratitude. So I'll tell you this. In the comment section, I want you to write 3 things that you're grateful for so that I can read them and I'll reply to them. All right, guys, this is Coach Wells. Thank you for checking out this podcast, and I'll see you later.